On the 9th of August, Safranet had the pleasure of attending the Botlhale Orenstein Memorial Lecture presented by Professor H Rees. Among the important themes she addressed was growing challenge of non-communicable disease. In this segment, Professor Rees speaks about how these diseases remain a critical public health target, while also highlighting the ongoing funding challenges that make taking them even more complex. Let's listen to her insight.
And the last one I'm going to talk about in terms of what we're doing and where are we on track or off track, sadly off track again, is non-communicable diseases. Again, there's a UN declaration on non-communicable diseases with targets and a WHO one, but no countries will achieve the 2025 targets. And it's a leading cause of premature death and disability worldwide, with over 17 million people dying of cardiovascular, non-communicable diseases in 2021. If you look at the graph on the right, you can see the leading causes in yellow: cardiovascular, red, cancers, blue at the bottom, diabetes, respiratory diseases in light green, and mental disease in the green above. So we're not on track there. So all a bit grim. 6 of them I've shown you, 6 we're not on track, and some of it we can put down to COVID, but some, unfortunately, we can put down to funding. And now this. So, reduction in official development assistance for health. So, how to start thinking about this? In 2024, this was the situation. Sub-Saharan Africa was the largest recipient of US health aid. You can see by far $42 million of overall for health aid. On the right-hand side, you can see that 70% of the global HIV/AIDS response was also contributed by the US. And that was hugely important for mother-to-child transmission and keeping people on treatment. Then on the other side, you can see that the US donations to the UN accounted for 40% of humanitarian aid. So putting all that together, what has just happened? This is what's just happened. Here you can see different countries with the US in yellow and other countries. You can see Germany in green and other countries there, and philanthropists. But you can see that we had a huge peak in global aid during COVID, and suddenly in 2025, this astonishingly sudden slump. So what do we do about this? What do citizens of rich countries think they are giving? And I think that's very important, because this is obviously a very political issue. In the pie chart on the right-hand side, you can see that 1.3% of the US GDP, this was prior to the cuts, was going to international affairs, and that included diplomatic, economic, and foreign aid programs. 1.3%, including the foreign aid programs. Then you can see in the blue bar chart that for the UK, 0.5% of their total government spend went to aid. Then this is a number of studies that I found that were looking at people's belief around how much are their governments giving to aid. And you can see in the first bar, from the US, UK, and the EU, huge overestimations of what their governments are giving for international aid. US 25%, UK 10 to 15, EU on average, there were several studies, 10 to 20%. Whereas when they were actually doing these studies, this was the actual spend, 0.2, 0.5, 0.5, 0.6. But the spend is going to cut, and you can see what we think is going to happen. If the spend cuts are as might occur from the US, it could go down to 0.03%. But 0.3% in the UK by 2027 and 0.3% in the EU. So cuts are coming, cuts have come. This is a study that looked at what was the impact of US aid funding and what is the possible impact of the withdrawal. You can see that that US aid funding, or the US government funding rather, saved huge numbers, millions of lives. Over 90 million lives were saved between 2001 and 2021. In the people receiving that aid, the mortality for all ages went down by 15%, but also by nearly a third in the under 5-year-old age group. The disease-specific mortality for HIV down by 65%, that was thanks to PEPFAR, malaria 51%, and the list can go on. The modeling in this study suggested that between 25 and 2030, if we do see this huge cancellation of international aid by the US government. You can see how important they were. Then you would get potentially another 14 million deaths, additional deaths globally, and another 4.5 million deaths amongst children. What has the impact of these cuts been on the World Health Organization? I've just outlined how important it is. You can see that they've had about a fifth of their budget cut, and that means that they slashed about 20% of their staff, both at HQ and in the regions. They've slashed staff and activities in their global programs. And they have many targets for eradication and elimination. The eradication target is for polio. Polio has had six times since 1988. The polio eradication program has said to the world, we're nearly there, and has set an eradication target date, but had to move it. And the difficulty with polio is you get that close to eradication, and as long as you've got a few infections, if you take your foot off the gas, that's what happens. And this is what's happening with polio. But now polio is really being affected because they too, as one of the WHO programs, have had a massive cut. And so they're looking at what do we do. They're once again going to have to change their eradication target. The African region has lost over 150 million from operations and programs very rapidly. US and Argentina have withdrawn from WHO. And RFK Jr. Has proposed in a talk that he gave at the Gavi replenishment meeting that there is a discussion going on for an alternative or accountable health institution, global health institution outside WHO.